Welcome to AP lesson number 2 on entering vendors. I'm currently in the AP Center screen and we've already set up our vendor types, so now we're going to enter vendors. What we need to do first is click the new button because that tells Cobra that we're in new vendor entry mode rather than lookup mode. So as we click the new button, we're brought to the S name field, which is a dual purpose field. Just like with customer entry, vendor entry is the same kind of thing. You can enter a short name or a short name for the vendor, up to 6 characters long, that will help you find this vendor on different lists. So whether that's a subcontractor or a material supplier, whatever that might be. So what I'm going to do is enter a quick short name for this vendor, and as I press enter, I'm brought to the vendor type field where I can then select the type of vendor for this vendor I'm setting up. And in doing so, as I press enter, you can see that it automatically filled up the GL accounts for this vendor, and that's one reason why we use vendor types. Now, vendor ID is a 2-character field. Its primary use is to link between purchase orders, accounts payable, and even your material price book, to link those together, especially by different groups of vendors. Now, it's more important to use vendor types, or rather vendor IDs, especially if you're using a price updating service to update your material price book prices. So if you're using, say, Viking as a material supplier and their 2-character vendor ID is VK, you would want to enter the same thing here. For Gooden, I happen to know it's GD, so I will type that in here. Otherwise, any 2-character ID will be required to be entered there. As I press enter, I'm brought to the vendor account number field, and this is the account number that they have assigned to you, and it shows up on their statements and invoices. So you can enter that here. That will also show up on any check stubs that you write for the vendor. As I press enter through these fields, it's pretty obvious what these are. I'll kind of fill in what I need, and then I'll stop when I get to some more specific fields that you might need more explanation. Obviously, a social security number isn't required on all vendors, but maybe your subcontract vendors, you might want that in there. Who's your contact at the supplier, which purchase orders can use as well. And then your phone numbers. You have up to 4 phone numbers, a fax, and an email. I'll just press enter through those. Those can be entered later anyway, so don't have to enter them right away. Now, the year-to-date purchases, it isn't required that you put anything in here, but if you're starting this at a certain point during the year and you really want Cobra to keep track of your year-to-date purchases, you can have a starting point for that. But I usually think that that's a little bit difficult to ascertain, so most people don't enter anything there. AP balance, that will be updated for you as you begin entering invoices and then paying them off. So you shouldn't have to enter anything in the AP balance. But this is really the more important part of the vendor setup, is this area of the screen when it comes to discounting and knowing when invoices are to be paid and all of that information. So what we can do is enter a discount percent. So if your vendor offers a 1% discount if you pay by the 10th of the month, this is exactly how you would set it up. Because as you know, all of our percentages are really entered as decimals. So 1% is entered as 0.01, 2%, 0.02, etc. Now, the discount day is the most common way that vendors offer discounts. So the discount day is defaulted to 10 because usually you can get the discount until the 10th day of the month. Now, if you enter something in that field, you will not be allowed to enter something in this field, which is called days for discount, because there are 2 different ways that vendors offer discounts. Now, again, most of the time, almost 100% of the time, or 90% of the time, the vendors offer discounts by paying by the 10th of the month, and that's why the discount day of 10 is in there. But there are still a few straggling vendors out there that offer discounts if you pay within so many days. So you would put, you know, your 10 in here if that were the case. But again, Cobra won't let you save the vendor with something in both fields, because then it won't know how to calculate your discounting. So I will leave it this way, and I will continue on to the statement day. The statement day is defaulted also at 28. Now, let me explain that, because it really has to do with when the vendor discount and due dates are to be calculated. So obviously the discount day says if you pay it by the 10th of the month, you can receive the 1% discount. But which month? The statement day helps us calculate which month that is. So if you look at the statement day on your vendor statements, this is their cutoff day to you as to when the discounts can be calculated. So for example, if you receive an invoice up to the 28th of this month, the discount can be taken up to the 10th of the next month. But if you receive an invoice after the 28th of this month and before the 10th of next month, the discount can be taken for an extra month out. So you'll see me play with that as we do some invoice entry. But again, if you find yourself changing your discount date and your due date a lot, you might want to revisit the statement day so that you don't have to be fitzing around with those when you're entering invoices. Days due, that's pretty self-explanatory. Some vendors you might just set to 0. With suppliers though, this is pretty standard. Credit limit, although we don't do anything with either the credit limit or the credit terms, you can certainly put your own information in there, like it's $10,000 or whatever. So at this point we're not using those for any other purpose than just screen display. Now the PO discount percent, this is kind of a cool new field that appeared just a couple years ago. If you're planning on using purchase orders and you order a lot from this supplier, a lot of suppliers are getting pretty savvy and saying, well, if you order everything on purchase orders, we'll give you an additional 1% discount. So what this will do is, as you begin using purchase orders down the road, it will automatically discount your prices to be paid to the supplier by this discount percent. It's pretty cool. As I press enter, I'm brought to the 1099 box. Now, most vendors don't receive a 1099, so this is only applicable, this and the next field are only applicable on vendors who might receive a 1099, such as subcontractors, outside contractors, things of that nature. So, but this allows you to control which box on the 1099 that you want their information printed on. So when you print 1099s at the end of the year, first of all, it will only print for vendors who you have this received 1099 check, obviously, and that their amount that you've paid them over the years is $600. So there's a couple criteria there. But you can control which box on the 1099 you want their information to be printed on, if they are indeed to receive a 1099. I'll take that out for now. Now these are the GL accounts that are set up with the vendor after we selected the vendor type. Now we can customize these per vendor, but chances are you don't need to. So, and the other thing you can do is, if the pay to is going to be different than what you see on the screen, in other words, if this address represents a particular branch of the supplier, but you pay the bills for all the different branches to one pay to, you can change the pay to here, and then when you do a pay list later on to pay your vendors, they will be sorted by the pay to here. Otherwise, if you don't do anything at this point, you can either just press enter through the fields, and Cobra will then save this information down in the pay to. At this point, you can just come up to the toolbar and click the save button. If anything is wrong at this point, you forgot a critical field, or you forgot your vendor ID, or something isn't right, Cobra is checking that at this point. If everything's okay, it saves the vendor, and you're good to go. So if we wanted to find this new vendor, we can do it one of two ways. We can come into the S name field, and let's say we want to find Gooden. Well, as soon as I start typing a couple of letters and I press enter, Cobra will return a list of vendors that have that in their S name. So then I can select that vendor and start working with it, enter an invoice, whatever I need to do. The other thing is, you can look at your whole vendor list by clicking on this Find button on the toolbar, and by clicking into it and then starting to type a few letters, you'll get quickly to that area of your vendor list so that you can find the vendor that you want to look to work with, and then double click on it to bring it up on the screen. And notice when I did that, the Pay To was indeed filled in for me after I had saved that vendor. So now at this point I can enter invoices. If I want to keep extensive notes about the vendor, I can click into the Notes tab, start entering notes. Whatever I want. Doesn't matter, I can come in later and enter more notes, but whenever you make a change to a vendor, you want to click the Save button to permanently save it with that vendor. We have you do that on purpose because a lot of times when you come into a screen and maybe you start, well, let me do that again, bring up a different vendor, start typing over, sometimes your fingers fumble and you accidentally type something over. Well, we don't permanently save it. So in that case, then you can just bring up the vendor again and it will be reset. And that's why we make you save any changes that you make to a vendor, a customer, a PO, once it's already been saved. That ends the lesson on setting up vendors.